Serious. People who had a premonition that something terrible was going to occur, and then it actually happened. What is the story? I have predicted things in my dream multiple times. One example is, I remember dreaming of seeing my sister sick in the hospital. She looked so out of it and looked very weak. The next night, I dreamed there was a terrible thunderstorm. It was pitch black outside, but every time lightning would strike, I would see the Grim Reaper. He was getting closer and closer. But I managed to wake up right before he got to me and my family. The next day, I found out my sister had brain cancer. She is fully recovered now. Another incident, I dreamed I was walking home from school. It was right down my street. As I was approaching the crosswalk, I saw a man with long brown hair in a green old car. He made eye contact with me and slowed down his car. My fight or flight kicked in, and I bolted home and slammed and locked the front door. The next day I was walking home from school and guess who I saw? A man with long brown hair in a green old car. He made eye contact with me and slowed down. I went back to the crowd of kids and he sped up and left. When my oldest son was a baby, roughly 2 years old, I woke up from a nightmare, paralyzed and crying. I remembered vague details. We, my spouse, my child and I, went to a dilapidated house where my son fell from through a weakened portion of the floor and broke his neck. His ice blue eyes stared at me, and I saw that when I woke up and it wouldn't fade away. Had the dream again the next night. Became terrified of sleeping after that and found myself scared spitless that my baby was going to have a broken neck. Finally told spouse about nightmare after third or so time having dream and the dream didn't come back. Fast forward 6 months, I finally have the sight of his eyes out of my head. Spouse has new job and makes a new friend. Friend just bought an older 3-story house that needed some work, gutted and redone. We went over with my son, and I looked at the house, and suddenly, those lifeless blue eyes came at me from my very much alive child. Refused to go in. They walked in and started seeing what was wrong. Spouse's friend dropped a toolbox on the 3rd floor, and guess what? Floor gave away. Never did have that dream again, nor the vision of lifeless blue eyes. This wasn't me, but my cousin. For my sister's graduation, our whole mom's side of the family were visiting from several states away. We were staying at a cabin and the second to last night there, my cousin had a nightmare that everything was on fire. She was about 10 and almost never had nightmares, so this was very uncharacteristic for her. The next night, my grandmother was in a tizzy about possibly missing her flight the next day. We were in a very small area. Missing a flight was not really a risk. But my cousin joined the fuss, and it turned into such a hullabaloo that the whole family ended up leaving at 9 p.m. to head back into town. That night at 1 a.m., lightning struck the propane tank along the outside of the cabin and created a massive explosion. The cabin was obliterated in seconds and burned for hours. The small town fire department, made up entirely of volunteers, didn't manage to put the fire out until about 8 a.m. That was when we originally planned to leave. If we had left in the morning like we planned, every single one of us would have died. I am 6 years older than my younger brother. When I was 16, I woke up in the middle of the night distraught. I had had a dream that my brother passed away that was so vivid that my mother had to physically take me to his room to prove he was okay. In my dream, my brother had been ran over by a car and died instantly. The next morning, my mother was exhausted from calming me down the night before. She gets into her car and starts to back out of the driveway. She stated that she thought of my dream and decided to stop the car and check on my brother before leaving for work. When she got out of the car, she found that my brother had wiped out on his bike and his head was inches from her rear tire. He was positioned in a way that she was unable to see him in the mirrors. I don't really get specific premonitions, just vague feelings. But my mom does. When she was younger, maybe 15 or 16, her best friend was moving out of their neighborhood. They ended up stealing the street sign for the street they lived on as a going-away present for the friend. When the friend was packing the last of the stuff in the car, along with the sign, my mom got a bad feeling and told her friend to move the sign and anything else important out of the trunk, or it would get destroyed. My mom's friend didn't think it was a big deal, but still moved the sign and a few other things into the back seat with her. Then, she was on her way. A couple hours later, my mom got a call from the friend saying that on the way to their new house, someone had rear-ended their car so badly that everything in the trunk was completely destroyed. She was baffled at how my mom knew, but my mom said it was just a premonition, things like that, and predicting people's deaths happened several times too. Like when she was a kid, she would wake up in the middle of the night and see a relative of hers and, little fuzzy on the details here, sorry, see or hear them say goodbye. So when she'd get up in the morning, she'd ask her mom if they died that night. Every time it happened, she was right. This has happened to me several times. I see visions of things happening, sometimes when I'm awake, sometimes I dream them. They are almost always ordinary things like, I saw a woman and man I didn't know come to our office. I saw them enter the door and comment about the ridiculously loud bell. The woman was slender, blonde, in her late 50s with a man about the same age wearing khaki pants and a t-shirt. The woman was bringing a chocolate pie for my boss. Weird, right? A few weeks later, that exact couple entered the office. Turns out, they are friends of my boss and brought the pie to thank him for something. Exactly what I saw is what happened from when they entered the office until I took the pie from her hands to place it in the freezer. Although most visions are ordinary, I have had some foreknowledge events that are more extraordinary. A few years ago, I was meeting with a client from out of town. As we said our goodbyes, he said, "We'll see you in the spring." And I suddenly knew he would die and I would never see him again. A few weeks later, we learned he was diagnosed with cancer and he passed pretty quickly. One more. Years and years ago, I got a call on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. It was around 10 a.m., and as soon as the phone rang, I knew my friend was dead. He died in a drunk driving accident the night before. These experiences are just part of my daily life. I don't pay a lot of attention to them or look too deeply into it. I consider it a kind of gift. I drove a friend home back in high school. It was raining really hard, just unbelievably rough. When we arrived at his house, I got out to grab one of his gym bags from the car while he grabbed his iPod from the 6-cord. There was this strange moment where it felt like everything just stopped. We looked at each other over the hood of the car and a shiver went down my spine. He just frowned and said, "Something awful has happened." That was my feeling too. He went inside, I drove the rest of the way home. 2 hours later, he sent me a police report, freaking out. 2 girls from a neighboring high school that we knew through other friends had taken a turn too sharply and spun out because of the rain. Both died on impact. There had been a car behind them, so the time of death was a known fact. My friend glanced at the time in my car when he grabbed his iPod, and the weird moment outside was the time they died. Still gives me chills to this day. Got a call late one night from my friend. I'll call her A. Several states away. I had given her my pet bird before we moved, a year or 2 earlier, because my parents said we could only take the family dog. I answer the phone and she's crying. I say, "Hey, what's wrong?" She cried and quietly said, "Chester's dead." Then it was silent. I lay there for what seemed like forever trying to determine if that was a dream, too afraid to move my hand for fear it was real. Finally moved it and felt a wave of relief. Fell back asleep. The next day, I got a phone call from A. I answered, she was crying. And I knew. But I still asked, "Hey, what's wrong?" She said it the exact same way. It was awful. My parents were freaked out too because I had told them about my nightmare before she called that day. We never really talked about it though. This was 15 years ago and it still lingers over me. I've had a couple other dreams about people dying that came true, but in the dream, I couldn't figure out who it was. I wouldn't wish this for anyone. It's terrifying. Okay, so about 10 years ago, I was asked to be in my friend from high school's wedding. I was living in NYC at the time, so I took the train down to my parents' place in Virginia. The next morning, we were going to drive to the state the engagement party was in. That morning, I woke up and didn't want to leave my parents' place. We finally got on the road around 1 p.m., way later than expected because I was dilly-dallying. The entire ride, I was saying I felt weird. We didn't get to the hotel until around 1 a.m. My mom went to check in and get our key at the front of the hotel, comes back to the car, and we drive around to the area of the hotel our room was supposed to be. This was a very nice hotel in a very nice area of town. We get our stuff and walk into the elevators. Then a man comes out of nowhere and starts saying he loves some store near the hotel. It was weird, but whatever. The elevator opens and my mom and I walk in, and so does this strange man. We hit our floor, but the man doesn't hit any floor. That's when I noticed he was holding a gun. I paused. Then I finally said, is that a gun? And then the guy says, "No, it's a keychain my cousins gave me." I noticed this man had gotten on the elevator at the wrong side. We were the ones closest to the floor buttons and emergency stop buttons. The elevator opened and we ran out of there and into our room. Then we called down at the front, and as we were trying to explain what just happened, 2 gunshots were fired and a car goes tearing out of the hotel. The police were called, a woman and man were shot, and guess who their cousin was? That man in the elevator. We were so exhausted the next day, we just went back up to Virginia. My friend understood. So random. My best friend has deja vu dreams. I don't know the specific terminology for it, but basically, she will have deja vu during the day, but distinctly remembers it from her dream the night before. Most of the time, the occurrences are random and she'll casually say, "This was in my dream last night," and move on with her life. Sometimes she can even predict certain things the people around her will say, but only for a split second. One night, she had a dream that one of her friends from high school had sent her a post on Twitter. The tweet was paying respects to a former middle school classmate of hers that had passed away. Of course, at this point, the classmate was still alive. But sure enough, the next day, her friend sent her a tweet that said the same exact thing in her dream. And her middle school classmate had overdosed the night before. I had a nightmare that I got into a car wreck on my drive to work. I woke up in a cold sweat with a splitting headache. I called out of work, as I'm prone to migraines and felt one beginning. There was a bad wreck that morning, less than 100 yards from where the accident had happened in my dream. The only fatality was a young woman my age who was driving the same make and model car as I own, just a slightly different color. I don't know if it's exactly a premonition, but when I was in high school, I had a really weird dream. It was a bunch of my friends circled in a white nothingness around me. A black figure walked over to me, flicked his wrist, and the circle started spinning. He told me I had to choose, that most would be fine, but one would not. He said terrible things to me until I just yelled to stop. The circle of my friends stopped spinning and my boyfriend was in front of us. The black figure moved to him, and when he moved away, my boyfriend was on the ground, not moving. The figure said, "I made my choice, and it couldn't be undone." I texted him in the morning and asked him to please be careful, that this dream just gave me a weird feeling. He texted back joking, told me not to worry. During ninth period, I got a text from a different friend telling me to get to the gym now. I got a pass for the bathroom and was stopped from getting anywhere near the gym by a bunch of teachers' admin because there were EMTs leaving the gym into the hallway with a stretcher. My boyfriend had gym that period. During one of the games, he was body slammed by a much larger kid and went flying. He lost consciousness for a short time, I'm not quite sure how long, which necessitated calling an ambulance. He broke his arm and ankle, chipped his elbow, cracked a rib, dislocated his hip, and had a concussion. It took months for him to recover, and he still walks with a very slight limp 10 years later. After he was properly checked into the hospital, had a room, had seen his parents, he texted me saying he should have listened. He always kept a sense of humor about it, but holy smokes, was I scared in the moment.